Wailing Well. I guess it's not surprising I became a librarian, since I spent all my high school years doing my homework in the reference department of the local library. Sometimes, when I was by myself, I'd go straight home, but most nights I could find someone to hang out with. We'd go down to the lake or to Tim Hortons, and later, after we turned 18, to the hotel for a brewski. At least, when we had money. When we were broke, we just walked around till the wee small hours. On this particular night in mid-March, Doug and I were plodding along the Lakeshore Road in a light but very cold rain. We had no funds, and the talk was boring, so I was about to call it a night when a silver K car pulled up to the curb. "Can I give you guys a ride somewhere?" The girl behind the wheel had curly, shoulder-length hair, which framed a pale but very pretty face. She went to one of the other schools, and I didn't know her name, but I recognized her. "Well, we're just bumming around," I said. "You want to ride instead?" She had a surprisingly husky voice. "You don't gotta ask twice," Doug laughed, and we crawled in. It wasn't a big car, but it was warm and dry. Turned out it was her mom's car, Mom being an oil company executive who was always at work. And so Christine, for such was the lovely girl's name, had the car, and she liked to drive. We headed east, stopping at the big park in Clarkson to watch the whitecaps roll in from the dark waters of the lake, then back to town. I tried to have a conversation with her, but Doug, who had grabbed the front seat, kept up a running commentary on rock music and was fiddling with the radio, changing channels, etc., 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 etc. I think he must have been getting on her nerves, and the evening ended early. She dumped me off first at the foot of Kerr Street, condemning me to a long, wet walk home, while Doug stayed in the nice, warm car. "If he rings the bell, man," I said, shaking my wet head in anger and frustration. It was a long night. But next day, Doug didn't even mention Christine or allude to the incident. So nothing must have happened between him and her. Serves him right, the a-hole. I managed to avoid Doug for the rest of the day. As truth be told, I didn't want to hang out with him that evening. I preferred to be alone. I didn't even head to the library, even though I had a ton of homework. Instead, I went for a stroll down the Lakeshore Road. At least it wasn't raining. After 20 minutes in the cold, a car pulled up beside me, and I heard Christine say, in her husky voice, "You're alone tonight." "Yeah," I said. "I know. Witty, eh? Hop in." She didn't have to ask me twice either. We headed north, out of the downtown, passing over the Queen to an area of new subdivisions. We didn't talk. I kept racking my brains for something interesting to say, and kept coming up short. But it was more than that. It was like I couldn't speak, shouldn't break the silence. After a time, Christine turned and gave me an odd smile. "You don't talk all the time, like your friend. What? Are you afraid of me?" "Afraid of making the wrong move, yeah." I started trying to say something, but she cut me off with a, "I like that. I like the silence." which made it all right. Or so I supposed. We passed down a muddy street in an area of houses under construction, ending up in a field of waste ground on a bluff overlooking the 16. Christine drove the car slowly across, stopping close to the edge. Is this it? I wondered, uncertain what to do. A bright full moon had broken through the clouds, bathing us in moonlight, but the effect was more foreboding than amorous. In truth, it seemed like a strange place to make out, if that's what this mysterious girl had in mind. I felt like a clod, but I had to ask, why are we stopping here? I love this spot. I find it restful. I've never been up here before, I said. And then Christine said, have you ever wanted to die, John? No! I blurted loudly in surprise. I hadn't seen that coming. I think about it all the time. But why? She ignored me and continued. A girl killed herself up here a while ago. Drove her car over the edge. It's 100 feet to the creek below, which is shallow, rocky. I think about her. I think about it all the time. All you have to do is put the car in drive and put your foot down on the accelerator. And she did it, just as she was talking. The car jumped forward to the edge. I had taken my seatbelt off earlier and got the passenger door open and fell out, landing hard on the cold, cold ground, looking up just in time to see the undercarriage of the car as it tipped over the side of the bluff. Just in time to hear the stupendous crash as the vehicle hit the creek bed below. I'd had the wind knocked out of me, but half crawled, half staggered to the brink, and looking down, saw nothing. Nothing. Just the silvery moonlight sparkling on the shallow water below. Where was the car? Where was Christine? There was nothing there. And then I remembered the whole thing. No, it couldn't be. It couldn't be. Somehow I made the long trudge back to town and found Doug at the hotel, watching the end of the hockey game of all things. One look at my face and he asked me what was wrong. I told him I needed a drink. Badly. He went to the bar and came back with a double vodka and Coke. I drained it in one gulp, so he got me another. When I was finally able to talk, I stammered, "Do you remember a girl picking us up the other night?" "What girl?" "Christine." "Christine who? She didn't give you a ride home?" Doug had no idea who or what I was talking about. According to him, we had both trudged home in the rain. "I would have really liked it if some chick had picked us up, man," he said, giving me a funny look. "You sure you're okay?" I didn't tell him about the accident. What would have been the point? The incident hadn't happened, as far as he was concerned, and he already thought I was nuts or stoned. But the accident really had happened. Only it happened a year earlier. The whole thing had come back to me when I peered in shock over the side of the bluff. Christine was a young woman who suffered from depression, and one March evening, she had driven her mother's car over the cliff above the 16 and died from her injuries. And I had known her. My buddies and I had gone to a dance at her high school, and she had caught my eye. We danced, then sat talking in the bleachers. I loved the sound of her voice. But then my presence was suddenly required outside. There was a fight or something, and when I got back, she was gone. I felt bad when I heard she had killed herself, but not for long. After all, I hadn't really known her, and there were lots of other girls. So I'd forgotten all about her, until the night she picked us up in the rain, when I recognized her, but forgot her name, and forgot she was dead. Did she remember me? Did she like me? Enough to put a spell on me? Enough to want to kill me? I guess I should have ended this by saying, "Hey, Christine, I found you attractive, and I'm sorry about what happened to you. But in future, let's just not meet." But that's not what happened. For months after, I walked the Lakeshore Road until the wee small hours of the morning, straining my ears for the sound of a car pulling to the curb, for the sound of a voice I knew saying, "You're alone tonight." Would I have got in? And would I have stayed in the car when she pressed her foot down on the accelerator? I'll never know. I'll never know, as she never came back. I guess that's okay. I guess. Ghost Stories of a Librarian. Library after midnight. In recent years, many libraries in North America have hosted sleepovers for their young adult patrons. Perhaps your local library has hosted such an event. I was never involved in such a program. Instead, I had my own sleepover. I was visiting a library branch on the other side of town from my home. It was late afternoon on a cloudy, overcast day. I was reading a magazine, a copy of the Fortean Times, while sitting in a comfy chair by an upstairs window, when the article I was reading, not being particularly compelling, I began nodding off. So I gave up. I shut my eyes and said to myself, "Take me, sleep. Take me." Which is when a kid began screaming in the nearby children's area. Now, I'm not one of those grumpy old people who think libraries should be as silent as a tomb, and I understand little kids can sometimes be rather noisy. But hey, they're patrons too. But this particular child was interfering with my attempt to obtain the balm of slumber. Worse, the hysterics had encouraged another child to burst into loud wailing tears. Stereo! I had resigned myself to going someplace to grab a coffee in an attempt to wake up, when I noticed the door of a nearby meeting room had been left open. Now I knew that along the windows of the meeting room there was a raised bench to provide extra seating, and I also realized it would be the perfect spot to stretch out for a few moments of blissful shut-eye. He who hesitates is lost, so I quickly entered the room and closed the door behind me. I turned out the lights, then closed the curtains, plunging the room into almost total darkness. Then I lay down, stretched out, and passed out. I awoke after a few refreshing minutes and took a look at my watch to see what time it was now. Midnight. Midnight? I staggered to my feet. It really was dark inside the meeting room. As dark as it was outside? I fumbled my way to the door, threw it open, and found the interior of the library plunged in darkness too. I could just make out the clock on the far wall. Yup, midnight. I couldn't believe I'd slept so long. I must have been far more tired than I realized. And I'd only had half a cup of coffee in the morning, so I hadn't really had any artificial stimulus. Still, and the joke was, I was still tired. I guess no one checked the meeting room, or if they hadn't noticed me in the enveloping darkness. Oh well, nothing for it but to go home. And that's when I remembered the doors were all alarmed. Oh, I could still leave and set off an alarm. However, I would be long gone by the time security showed up, so no, nothing was going to happen to me. But I was afraid some poor staff member would get in trouble over it, and I didn't want that to happen. After all, I used to work with these guys, and I knew them all by name, so I certainly wanted to spare them any grief. So, what to do? What to do? I suppose I could call one of them at home and ask them to come and get me out. Or I could go back to sleep and get let out in the morning. Everybody would have a good laugh at me at my expense, and no real harm done. So that is what I did. That is what I decided to do. But I had no sooner lay down upon the bench and shut my eyes when I heard some noise. A lot of noise. It sounded like a lot of people, and it was hard, lying down in the dark, to tell if they were laughing, or screaming. But if it was laughter, it was certainly raucous and discordant. I wondered if there was an after-hour library program. But then I remembered it was midnight, and there were no such things as midnight library programs. I didn't think. Cautiously, I opened the door to the meeting room and peered out. Now, the meeting room was on an upper or mezzanine level, and from the shadows of the doorway, I could see down onto the main floor of the library. And I saw nothing. Just row upon row of dark shelves of books. But wait. What was that in front of the large circulation desk? In the more open area? What? What I saw was not so much people as a shadowy movement, as insubstantial as smoke, a dark shimmering which reminded me of the distortion caused by heat radiating off a hot road in summertime. Almost impossible to explain or describe. But something was there, something moving, but shadowy, almost invisible, and making a hell of a lot of noise. Something Malignant. The fear washed over me, forcing me to retreat into the comforting obscurity of the meeting room. I didn't know what was out there, but what I did know was that it would harm me if it found me. If it found me. More like when it found me. I didn't think I could make it outside without encountering whatever was out there. So I decided upon the next best thing. I would pretend to be asleep. Play possum. Yeah, I know, pretty lame, but that's all I could think of at the time. I lay down on the bench, screwed my eyes shut, and lay still. It was even harder lying there, listening to the cascading eruption of agonized hilarity, like a laughter yoga class from hell. Worse still, the laughter was getting closer, and I was sure I could hear footsteps. Light, stealthy, but absolutely footsteps. And then the knocking started, at first lightly, like someone was tapping their finger on a counter or on a metal bookshelf, but it became progressively louder, 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 as if someone was slapping the palms of their hands or pounding their fists against the walls or any solid object they could strike for effect. In fact, who, or whatever was causing the knocking, was hitting the walls and windows so hard, I was sure they would break something, smash something, especially the glass. Something furry brushed against my face in the dark, but I managed to stifle my cry, and then relaxed when I realized it was only Poe. Poe, the library cat. The branch had a rodent problem, hence Poe, the exterminator. He was a sleek black cat with beautiful yellow eyes and was a favorite of the patrons, especially the kids. No doubt he too had been disturbed by the hubbub and now clung to me for safety and protection. Something began slamming the program room door with an impact as loud as the blast from a cannon. I turned over, face down on the bench, eyes glued shut, Poe frantically trying to burrow beneath me. The door of the meeting room burst open. Deathly silence, and then the sound of heavy footsteps on the carpeted floor. Something was standing over us. I held my breath. A terrific blow smacked me hard on the side of the head, so painful and humiliating it brought tears to my eyes. But I forced myself not to move. I lay there, cowering, and felt something lean forward until it was mere inches from my uppermost ear. I tried not to lash out in anger or start laughing. It was playing with me, and it was all pretty embarrassing. But poor Poe couldn't stand it. With a meow which could only be called a shriek, the black cat bounded for the open doorway and disappeared into the main area of the library. Almost immediately, the presence which had been oppressing me was gone, and something told me that the only way I would get out alive was to flee immediately, while I still had the chance. The meeting room had a side door leading to a stairwell connected with a fire door, and in less than a minute, I was outside and sprinting across the parking lot to my car. Driving away from the building, I saw a car from the security company speeding towards the library, but I was too far away and going too fast for him to see me. I drove at high speed, and when I got home, turned on all the lights in the house. I didn't sleep a wink till dawn. After all, I'd already had plenty of sleep. But nothing seemed to have followed me home. Nothing I was aware of. I stayed away from that particular library branch for about a month, but the next time I visited, I could see the staff were clearly upset. "What's wrong?" I asked a clerk at the circulation desk. "Oh, our little kitty cat, Poe, you know, the black cat? Well, he's vanished. We've had the whole community looking for him everywhere, but he's totally disappeared. It was like he was spirited off the face of the earth." And so, the cat didn't come back. Instead, it was a goner. And the creatures of the night managed to spirit it far away. Away. Poor Poe. Meow. The Rose Garden. Grandpa's story by this name appeared in his 1911 collection, More Ghost Stories. You should check out the original. It's a rather subtle tale. Well, grandson WSJ lives in Regina, Saskatchewan, on the Canadian prairies. So I don't really do rose gardening. But I do like to walk around Lake Wascana in beautiful Wascana Park in the middle of town. So this is my story. It isn't very subtle, but it is true. I had had a rough day at work and decided to decompress by going for a long walk around the lake, a distance of just over 3 kilometers. That's 2 miles for you American listeners. It usually took me about 45 minutes to an hour to hike. Okay, so I'm a slow poke. It was late April, when the local weather is still rather dicey. In fact, it had been a long, hard winter, so there were still mounds of dirty snow under the trees and along the sides of the path. It also gets dark early in April, and it was already dusk when I left my car at the Wascana Center and headed west, knowing I would finish my walk in total darkness. And darkness fell with a thud in about 10 minutes, at which point I was walking through an area of thick shadow and bushes and fir trees. And I heard the call of an owl, a great horned owl. If you've ever heard the hoot of a great horned owl, you'll never forget it. If you have never heard it, I'll do my best to imitate it. But if you're ever walking through the woods and you hear the call of the great horned owl, don't hoot back. I made that mistake once and was immediately swooped by a very angry and very territorial owl, and he only missed because I hit the dirt. I could imagine what those razor-sharp talons would have done to my scalp, and from then on, I treated the great horns with respect, if not affection. I wasn't too surprised on hearing the owl. As I said, it had been a long, harsh winter with lots of snow and -30 temperatures, and with many of the country fields snowbound, owls and other birds of prey had been forced to enter the city to hunt for food. What did surprise me was that there was more than one owl. I must have passed the tree where the owl was perched, for the next time I heard it, it was behind me. But up ahead, another great horned owl hooted a response. Almost like they're talking, I said to myself. But in reality, they were probably just marking their territory. But off towards the other side of the lake, a second bird called. Wow, there seems to be a whole flock of owls here. They usually don't hang out together. And then I heard the sound of wings overhead and saw a dark shadow alight on a bare branch directly above me. An owl. And she called my name. I Heard the Owl Call My Name is a famous novel by Margaret Craven. You should check it out, from your local library. The title refers to a First Nations belief that the hoot of an owl is a warning of imminent death. Well, I'd heard owls hoot before, and I had hooted back. And I was still here. But when I said the owl called my name, I meant it literally. It really had called me by name. WSJ. WSJ. It was a mocking female voice. And yes, I have some familiarity with mocking female voices. Even stranger, I didn't think the owl, the woman, whoever had spoken to me out loud. For I was certain I heard it in my head. Not out loud, in my head, like telepathy, if that makes any sense. And I was equally certain that the great horned owl, perched above me, was the being which had spoken. Well, I picked up the pace, following the trail as it moved past the bandshell, when I heard another saucy woman's voice. WSJ. WSJ. We see you. Glancing up quickly, I could see a great horned owl standing like a gargoyle atop the bandshell, and even as I watched, it was joined by a second bird. It was the owl that had originally hooted at me, and which appeared to be following me. Yeah, the one that had originally hooted at me, and it was following me. I increased my speed, following the trail as it curved around the west side of the lake, as I was determined to get to the other side of the water and away from the night birds. Behind me I could hear the two owls call, and from the other side of the lake, in the direction I was headed, there came an answering reply. They had me in their sights. Their night sights? Worse, as the trail took me past the nearby Albert Street Bridge, I saw a great horned owl perched atop of one of the decorative pillars. It was watching me. I hurried along, passing the front of the legislative building, and realized I was about to enter an area with a lot more trees and shrubbery and a lot more darkness. I thought about turning around and heading back the way I came, but I didn't want to meet those owls who had called to me. And I also had another problem. I had another problem. I had to go. Really badly. And the only washrooms that were open were ahead in the trees, in the darkness. I walked as fast as my overweight bod would allow, spurred on by fear and by the pressure on my bladder. And all the time, I could hear wings overhead and the hooting of owls in the darkness. The area near the washroom was plunged in almost total blackness, and I realized, with a shock, that all the nearby streetlights were out. In the enveloping gloom, I made my way slowly along the barely discernible paths until the gray bulk of the concrete washroom building loomed before me. And then I heard her say one word, "Now." And the air was immediately filled with wings and talons and beaks, and it was also filled with sardonic female laughter. I ran in blind terror, and blindly, as it was too dark to see. My toque was immediately pulled from my head, and when I threw up my arms for protection, I could feel the fabric of my winter coat being torn and clawed. I collided with the concrete wall of the lavatory, then staggered into the little alcove leading to the door of the men's room. Locked. Of course it was locked. Locked! Reeling in terror and despair, I stumbled out into the nearby roadway and was blinded by intense white light, followed by a loud, terrific screech. But the screech of brakes, not a bird of prey. "Hey, buddy," an angry voice yelled out. "You trying to get killed or something?" It was a young guy in a big black Dodge Ram pickup, and I told him I had been attacked by an owl and could he please give me a ride back to the Wascana Center? I'm sure he thought I was nuts, but he obliged, and I got my car and drove straight home. I was just unlocking my side door when I heard the woman, the original owl, my nemesis, speaking to me from a nearby fir tree. She said in her snarky, insulting voice, "Catch you next time, WSJ. Catch you next time." I don't walk around Lake Wascana anymore, and I never walk at night. Instead, when I need a walk, I head to the A.E. Wilson Park, where I walk the trails on the eastern side. It has a nice pond, some flower beds, and no trees. Why these owls, these harpies, why they still want to attack me, I just don't know. I've been harassed in the past by the night floaters. Perhaps they're friends, allies. Well, in future, owl ladies, harpies, let's not meet. But if you insist, catch me if you can. If, and that's a big if. WSJ here. Hope you found this yarn a hoot. Be sure to check out the original in print, or listen to one of the fine recordings of it available on YouTube. I don't know why the Harpies had it in for me. Must have been all those trips to Hooters. And here's a true story. I once dropped my elderly mother off at a shopping mall in Western New York so she could spend the day at her favorite activity, visiting the stores. And when I picked her up at 5 o'clock, she said, "Oh, you should have stayed with me. I had lunch at the most wonderful place, and you should have seen the waitresses. They were all stunning, beautiful girls. Real knockouts. You would have enjoyed it." And I said to her, "Oh, well, that sounds interesting. What was the name of the place, Mom?" And she thought for a moment. She said, "Well, it had kind of a funny name. Oh, yeah, it was called Hooters. Isn't that cute? Hooters." Mom, you were cute yourself, and I miss you. I really do. So please share this video. Comment. I love comments and try to respond. I really do. Drop a like. At least I hope you liked it. And consider subscribing for more night floaters, ghost stories of a librarian, and who knows, maybe even more Hooters. Stay hungry, but watch what you eat, and also watch where you eat. Library patrons are not always known for, to use a phrase from H.P. Lovecraft, their olfactory immaculateness. In other words, they stink. Some of them. But unless you have to stand next to them, are downwind of them, or, worst of all, share the washroom with them, it's usually more of an unpleasant nuisance than a serious problem. But it was a serious problem with the man in the old black suit. As soon as he stepped from the elevator, the entire fourth level of the university library was enveloped in a fetid miasma which spread to every corner of the floor. Students nodding off over boring assignments, even students sound asleep, would spring to life or wake up and instantly head for the nearest stairwell. Not the elevator, since if the odoriferous intruder had used it to come up to the fourth floor, the noxious smell would be sure to linger within, and you'd risk having to burn your clothes by letting the elevator door close you inside, with the stench. It was hard to describe the stench, as your impulse was to flee, not analyze it. But it was far, far worse than the usual perspiration or excrement smells. No, it made you think of dead things, corpses, decomposition and decay, the fumes almost liquid in effect, getting into your nose, your eyes, and affecting your taste buds for days. The guy was a walking biological weapon, a human stink bomb. The horrible smell man was odd in appearance, too. He was middle-aged, tall, the large body bloated, as if it had been stuffed into his old, shiny black suit. The extreme pallor of the swollen face was accentuated by his shock of black hair, so dark it looked like it had been painted atop the huge head, and the eyes were two black coals, empty. Empty. Dead eyes. He walked in a slow, jerky manner, and always headed to the same section in the stacks, the books on murder and historic crimes. And he walked alone, as everyone had fled. Everyone except Cassie. Cassie worked part-time as a page. You know, the people who put the books back on the shelves. Put the books back on the shelves, in the right places. The most important people in the whole library. For put a book in the wrong place, and no one will be able to find it, and use it. Cassie loved her job, as she could work around her class schedule, and she was very good, accurate, and fast. So, when she had a full cart of books to reshelve on the 4th level, she just couldn't leave, malodorous patrons or not. As soon as Cassie saw the man shambled into view, she rolled her book trolley to the other end of the stacks, as far away as possible. But the smell was still nauseating, and as soon as she was done her shift, she would run home for a quick change of clothes and a shower. A long one. Cassie always fled at the first sight, or the first whiff of the disgusting stranger. But in spite of running away, she could clearly see the man was becoming more disheveled, the walk more spasmodic, the body more corpulent, grosser by the day. Vestiges of the man's fetid pong lingered long after he was gone. Now Cassie wasn't sure how long he stayed, or what he did in the stacks. So, one quiet afternoon, when she was all caught up, she decided to investigate his usual haunt, the murder books. Cassie did a quick scan of the shelves and immediately noticed something amiss. "What's this doing here?" she said, removing the offending item from between 2 regular library books. It appeared to be a pocket-sized diary or daytimer with a black plastic cover. Opening it, she began to read. June 23rd. I have reluctantly come to the conclusion there is only one way to break the hold he has over me, and that is to... Cassie froze. Literally. She was suddenly enveloped in a mephitic cloud of foulness, and at the same time her body went cold, frigid, 20 below zero cold, and looking up, she saw the man in the shiny black suit standing a few feet away and staring at her. His eyes were 2 pools of total outer space blackness. Up close, his turgid face was yellow and greasy, almost as if it were melting. Without a word, he thrust out his right arm, swollen sausage fingers extended. Cassie handed him the diary without thinking, and then, overpowered by the man's presence and his horrible smell, she reeled back, clutching the shelves for support and involuntarily closing her eyes. When she opened them, the man was gone. Cassie went home sick and was gone for several days. But when she came back to work, she was sent to clean up the 4th, as the other pages had been avoiding it and had left several trolleys of books to be shelved. The smell on the floor was still rather unpleasant, but Cassie was angry with herself for missing work and rolled up her sleeves. The sooner I get these shelved, the sooner I'm out of here. Cassie's work brought her to the stacks containing the books on murder. And, well, she couldn't resist the impulse to look. You know, Curiosity killed the cat, but satisfaction brought it back. The diary had returned, parked between the same two books. She took it with trembling hands and randomly opened it. July 3rd. He has taken the bait. He will come over and discuss things after dinner tonight. And I've managed to convince him not to tell anyone else about the meeting. He will never come back. Now Cassie had been dimly aware of the bell announcing the arrival of the elevator, but didn't see the man until he tore the book from her hand, snarling, "Give me that!" It was not the man in the black suit, but a middle-aged man in gray tweeds with black-rimmed glasses and neat white hair. He looked academic, and Cassie had recognized him as a sociology prof. "Now what am I going to do about you?" he said. He was smiling, but without any warmth. "I didn't read it," Cassie blurted, and then realized it was a totally wrong thing to say. The professor leaned in towards her when they both heard the sound of the elevator bell and froze. Another car had arrived at the 4th level. The stench which enveloped them was far, far worse than the usual perspiration or excrement smells. No, it made them think of dead things, corpses, decomposition, and decay. The man in the shiny black suit loomed at the end of the stacks, and he was melting. Actually melting. "You!" the professor croaked in sheer terror, and the melting man thrust out his wet, rubbery hands and seized the professor by the throat and began to squeeze, 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 until the swollen sides of his yellow hands split, showering the surroundings with black, oily gore. The professor slumped to the floor dead as his killer's body collapsed and liquefied before Cassie's horrified eyes, until all that was left was a gelatinous, putrid mass and an old, shiny black suit. Security soon arrived, the whole library having been alerted by Cassie's ghastly screams. Cassie gave up her job at the library and her major, which had been in biochemistry. Watching substances change from solids to liquids no longer appealed to her. She didn't go into librarianship either. Instead, she's apprenticing in the trades, so she'll never have to hang around libraries again, and can spend her working hours out in the fresh air. More money, too. Yeah, Cassie was always a very smart girl. The whole story was revealed and then hushed up when the little diary was examined. It seemed the professor owed money, a lot of money, to a prominent alumnus who was pressing him for payment. The prof couldn't pay, but invited the alumnus to come to his house to discuss the matter, and murdered him with a blunt object before burying him under the basement floor. At least, the alumnus had been buried there, for his corpse no longer lay under the fresh cement. The alumnus was a rather eccentric bachelor, and so no one missed him, and the whole story might never have been known. But for the diary, how it came there and how the professor knew it was there, no one knows. But no one knows how a dead man could come back to take his revenge on the living. Hey, it's supernatural. One last thing. The diary had been placed between two specific volumes, Murder at Harvard by Helen Thompson and The Disappearance of Dr. Parkman by Justice Robert Sullivan. Both books concerned the 1849 murder of businessman George Parkman by John Webster, a chemistry lecturer at Harvard Medical College. Webster owed Parkman a lot of money, and when pressed for payment, Webster murdered the lender with a blow to the head, then dissected and cremated the body. Was placing the diary between those books an attempt at a clue? If so, it was a rather obscure one. After all, who remembers Professor Webster? Even though he was a real cut-up. In the end, he was sentenced and hanged, which must have burned him up. Burned him up, just like he'd burned up George Parkman. WSJ here. Sorry, not really. Not really, no. About the black humor. And share, comment, and please drop a like. Unless you consider this video a real stinker. Hope that was a coherent sentence. It didn't read like one. Anyways, please share, comment, drop a like. For more information on the classic Parkman-Webster murder case, which really is interesting, please check out the link to an article about it in the description. And please consider subscribing to my channel for more tales of the night floaters and ghost stories of a librarian. And remember, stay hungry. Unless this little yarn has put you off your feed bag.